Hey, Graphic Design 1. So we're going to learn how to add a cast shadow to something today. And when we do that, we're going to download some things from the Google Classroom. So on your Google Classroom, you're going to look for an assignment that says adding a cast shadow. And then you're going to find the Eames chair and the white wall background. And you're going to download both of them. I've already done that. All right, so you can see I have mine downloaded here already. In the past, when we've opened new pictures in Photoshop, we've done File, Open, and found it in our downloads. But another way to do that would be to just find the picture that you downloaded, right-click on it, and then you're gonna open it with Photoshop. So that way, it'll automatically open it for you instead of having to open Photoshop and then go File, Open. Just two different ways to make the same thing happen. So here is our Eames chair. We're going to remove this white background and give it a different colored background. So this first section here will be kind of review of things that we already know. So let's go ahead and find our magic wand tool. And we're gonna click on the white background. And then if you notice, once you've done that, there's like this little hole in the chair where there's extra white background that it did not automatically select. So we're gonna go ahead and hold Shift and select that middle section. So that way we have all of the white spaces selected at once. And then from there, right now we have the background selected. So if I were to put a mask on it, it gets rid of the chair and not the background, right? So in order to do the opposite of that, we need to invert our selection. So do Control-Shift-I, and then add a mask. And now we've gotten rid of the white background and we just have the chair. Now, again, that should have been review. We should all have known how to do that. And then now let's also make our chair a little bit smaller so we have more room to add the shadow. So we're gonna do Control-T and then make that guy a little smaller and move it over to the left. So we're gonna be adding our shadow on this side. Once you've made it the size that you like, go ahead and press Enter to save that transform. And then the next thing we're gonna do is add a different colored background. So this will be some new information. So we're gonna go ahead and add a new layer. And then we're gonna, in our layers, drag that new layer underneath our chair. And then we're going to make a new fill layer with that layer selected. So you can see I have layer 1 selected here, it's highlighted. And then we're gonna go layer, new fill layer, solid color. Once you've done that, you can give it a title. So we can title this background color. That's what this pop-up menu is asking us to do. Once you've given it a name and you press OK, you're gonna see a pop-up menu that will ask you what color you would like your background to be. So yours might look like this, right? Because your preset foreground color is white. So if your little circle is up in the top left-hand corner, then when you go to change this color, it's not gonna change because it's all the way up. The hues are not the colors that we want to select. It's just white, right? Same thing would happen if I went down to black and I changed these hues. Nothing would change, right? So I want to put that circle somewhere in the middle so we can get a nice gray tone. And then you can click and drag this hue slider to whatever color you want. I'm going to go ahead and pick like a nice green color because I like that vibe, but you can make yours whatever color you're interested in. Once you're done with that, you're gonna press OK. And then you're gonna notice over here in our layers that we have a new layer that's labeled as background color and has this new icon that has the color we picked. So if we ever wanted to change that color, we could just double click on that guy and the color picker comes back up and you could change your color to be something different, right? So it is something that you can edit. Now that we've got that situated, so we have our chair removed from the background and we have a new color in our background, let's go ahead and add a shadow. So if you click on that chair, we're going to use our FX, which again should be a little bit of review. We use this on our vintage t-shirts. FX, if you say it really quick, sounds like effect, right? So we're going to go ahead and add the effect of a drop shadow. And when you do that, make sure that the color is a darker color. So like if you double click on that guy, you don't want it to be up here in this lighter range of different colors. You want it to be down here almost black, right? I could make it like a darker green, but really it's, as long as it's almost black, it's not gonna matter. And then the blend mode automatically should say multiply. If for some reason yours is different, please make sure it does say multiply. And then we want our opacity to be a little higher, like 80, somewhere between like 70 and 80%. In the past, the angle and the distance has been important on this one, but for our purposes today, the angle and the distance really doesn't matter because we're going to be detaching the shadow from the chair. So the biggest things we want to worry about are the spread and size. So we want that spread and size to be relatively small. Like we don't want, if we make the size really big, let me move this over so that way you guys can see what I'm talking about. If we make the size really big, the blur becomes really, really blurry, right? And we don't want it to be really blurry. We want that size to stay smaller so that the edge of your shadow is blurred a little bit, but you can still tell that there's an edge, right? So I'm gonna leave mine somewhere around 10 pixels. Again, yours doesn't need to be exactly like mine, but something similar to that would be okay. So once we've got a drop shadow that looks similar to this, we're gonna go ahead and press OK. And then if we look in our layers over here, we're gonna see that we now have our effect attached to that chair. But I wanna be able to manipulate that effect separately from the chair. So another word for effects is layer style, right? So remember when we first did that with the chili dog, I gave you a slide deck that said layer style guide, right? So if we go up to layer and we find layer style, there'll be an option inside of layer style that says create layer. And so what that's gonna do is it's gonna make me a new layer that will have that drop shadow separated from the chair. And it's gonna give me a warning. It's gonna say, hey, you can't edit this after you do this action. And we're gonna say, okay, yeah, we know. So now we have our chair with a mask on it, and we have a drop shadow on top of our colored background that we picked. So go ahead and select that drop shadow. And then right now, the drop shadow is just giving us like a 3D effect, like the chair is coming towards us, right? But what we want is for the chair to look like it's existing in the space. So we want the chair to look like it's here with a shadow on the ground. That's what a cast shadow is. It's the light hitting a subject and then the shadow being cast onto the ground. So in order to make that happen, we're going to distort this drop shadow. So we're gonna go up to Edit, Transform, Distort. Now when we do this, all of our little squares on our bounding box will be a point that we can edit and move. So I could click on this square of my bounding box and drag it down. So I should be able to extend this guy out as well. So instead of just doing the corners, I could make the whole thing a little bit longer. And it's gonna be kind of difficult to line up the feet of your shadow. So what I'm gonna encourage you to do is just get the opposite diagonal corners to touch. So you see how this guy touches here and this guy touches here, but the middle two don't. That's okay, don't worry about it. We're gonna fix that in the next step, okay? So we're gonna make this look like the shadow is on the floor. And then once we're done with our transform, we could click on the little done icon on this pop-out menu, or we could just press enter on our keyboard. So now the issue is that these two little guys in the middle are not cooperating. They need to go to their respective places of where they're supposed to be, right? So we're going to select them and edit them independently. I'm going to go ahead and use my polygon lasso tool to select the first leg. And I'm selecting this leg with like a big border around it. So if you see, I've got like space in between the shadow and my marching ants. But it's only going to move that leg because that's all that's in that layer. It's transparent outside of that. So we're going to go edit, transform, distort. And then we're going to move this so that way it looks like that leg is touching the chair where it's supposed to. And then again, we can press enter to exit that free transform. But because we made a selection first, we also have to deselect before doing the next step. So now we're going to do Control D and then repeat that for this leg right here. So I'm going to click around the leg and then do edit, transform, distort, and move that leg so that it's touching the other side where it's supposed to go. Okay, so now I have an issue. So if you guys look at my shadow, I messed up parts of the shadow when I did my selection, right? But the good news is we can just paint it back. So on that same layer that says drop shadow, I'm gonna do I for eyedropper, and then I'm gonna select the color that I have for my shadow, and then do B for brush. And we gotta make it a lot smaller. And then we're gonna make the hardness of the brush be 0. And the opacity of the brush should match the shadow opacity that we made earlier. So it should be closer to 80%. And then we can go ahead and just paint that part of the shadow in that we're missing. Just like that. So now if we zoom back out, we don't have any harsh edges and all the feet touch, right? So this technically is a cast shadow, but there are some things that we could do to be even fancier. So we're gonna go ahead and do those together right now. If you guys think about shadows that you've seen in your life, probably not all of them have a harsh edge all the way around, right? Some of them might look like they fade out as they get further away from the subject. So that's gonna be our next task. So with that drop shadow layer selected, we're gonna go to our move tool, and then we're gonna hold Control on our keyboard and click on the thumbnail for that layer. When you do that, you're gonna automatically get the marching ants going all the way around your shadow. And then we're going to add a gradient that's going to make it fade out as it gets further away from our chair. So we're gonna find our paint bucket tool and click and hold on to it to use our gradient tool. And that gradient should, the foreground color should be the color we were just using for our shadow, right? So, because we just used our eyedropper and our paintbrush to fix our shadow. So if you guys look up here on my gradient drop-down menu, it's this dark green color. But right now it fades out to white. So instead of having that gradient, I need to click the drop-down menu, open the basics folder, and choose the one that fades out into transparent. So it should be the second option. Now when you do that, you'll see that the preview of your gradient goes from the dark color of your shadow to nothing, which means that if I click and drag inside of the selection that I've made, it should give me a gradient that fades out. Now, right now we can't really see it yet, but that's because we have a new layer. So if you look in your layers, you have a gradient fill layer that should have automatically been added when we did that gradient just now. And we still have our original drop shadow. So all we're gonna do is turn the eyeball off on that original drop shadow, and then now we have a shadow that fades out. So in order to edit that, if you wanted to see more of the end of it over here, you would click and drag this circle until you're happy with how it looks. So let me zoom out. So that way we get something kind of like this. So it's darker closer to the chair and then fades out and gets lighter as it goes away from the chair. It's exactly what we wanted. And this is the end of the first version, right? So this is our Eames chair on a colored background with a faded shadow. Perfect, looks good. So save this as a Photoshop file and then also export it as a JPEG to turn it into the assignment. But we're not done. So the next thing we're gonna do is open our white wall background. So I'm gonna go ahead and right click on that guy in my folder, open with Photoshop. And then on this image, we're gonna practice editing that shadow so that it interacts with multiple surfaces. So right now this one is kind of just we got to do whatever we wanted because there's nothing in this picture. It's just the green background. But the other one has a concrete floor and a brick wall. So the shadow would go on the floor and then on the wall in two different directions. So that's what we're gonna do next. So let's go ahead and take our gradient fill layer and our chair layer and drag them into the tab for the new background. And then we're going to move that chair and maybe possibly make it bigger. So that way it looks like it's in this space on the concrete floor. And right now the issue with this shadow is that it's just flat. It's just like if it were just on the concrete floor and not also on the wall. So we need to edit this section so that it looks like it's on the wall. And before we can do that, we need to make some edits to this layer that has a gradient fill. So this layer with a gradient fill has the gradient color that we picked and a mask. And in order to edit those things, we need to actually rasterize it and turn it into an object that we can then manipulate with the Distort. So we're gonna do two things. We're gonna right click on the tab here where it says gradient fill, rasterize layer. And then after we rasterize that layer, we're also going to apply the layer mask. So we're gonna click on the mask. See how my white outline is on the mask here? And then right click, apply layer mask. So now instead of having a gradient with a mask, we have an object that the gradient and the mask are fixed, like they can't be edited anymore, which means that we can manipulate it with our Distort tool. So in order to distort this, I need to select part of it. So I'm gonna go with my marquee selection tool and select the top part of my shadow until it gets to the part where the wall and the concrete floor meet. And then now that I have a selection, I can do edit, transform, distort. And then I can move those corners to make it look like the shadow is on the wall. If it's hard to move with your mouse, you could also move the selection with your arrows on your keyboard. But yeah, so now we have a shadow that looks like it's both on the concrete floor and being like folded up onto the wall. And this is the second image that you're gonna upload to the assignment. So you're gonna save this as a Photoshop document, and then you're also going to export this as a JPEG as evidence that you were paying attention. So this is going to be a skill that you need to use on your surrealism image assignment. Let me know if you have any questions.